Is there really a difference between a merger and an acquisition? Two companies become one. Well, we're going to answer those questions as I sit down with Kison Patel, the founder of DealRoom, to discuss all things M&A. Kison has a unique story into an often seemingly opaque part of the business world, mergers and acquisitions. He shares his journey of bootstrapping DealRoom, including the mistakes that he made along the way and what has ultimately led them to be successful despite not raising any outside capital. And we, of course, dive deep into the nuances of mergers and acquisitions, how to approach a deal, whether you are on the buy side or the sell side, either you are the acquirer or becoming acquired. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Silicon Alley podcast featuring the Kison Patel. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. Kison, welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Hey, thanks for having me, William.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. This is a topic that we have not really dove into on the podcast so far, which is mergers and acquisitions, and then even thinking about diligence and what that looks like. So I'm really excited to dive into all of that today. But I'd like to start off. Can you give the audience a little context? Because you've had an interesting journey as an entrepreneur as well, and how you sort of ended up in this not necessarily the most common area of business, which is mergers and acquisitions, but a very complex one.
A definitely non-traditional entrance into this industry. A lot of folks get into like a Ivy League school, investment banking, and work your way up through the chain and find your way in maybe corporate M&A or private equity. I, on the other hand, started with the story of just failing out of undergrad. I literally failed for academic deficiencies with a very short attention span, struggled, and found myself working up from the bottom. Worked for a family member, which is a whole other experience of its own, running some of the Subway franchises, again, starting as a dishwasher, having to work a way up to a year span where I was managing a few locations. In that period of time, I thought real estate was my career path to overcome not completing my undergrad and overcome some of those barriers to access opportunities. And I found out quickly I was terrible at selling houses. I couldn't connect with the emotional aspect. I'm actually doing it today. I got to go look at a house, and I don't want to deal with it. I got that into the numbers, and through the encouragement of a friend, I found my way into working with a little startup that had an M&A advisory practice. It was very focused on the broad set of different types of businesses, but exposed me to how do you sell a business? How do you sit down and work with the company that's looking to go to market and sell their business? How do you work with somebody that's looking to buy a business? And I really latched on to the finances, and specifically taking financials and building a narrative and where the opportunity is. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And it did well the first year. After a year, I started my own practice, built it up over 10 years, where I created a focus on hospitality, working with hotel chains like Kimpton, Extended Stay America, to acquire either single assets for or redevelopment portfolios. And then I got into the space of financial services, working with small financial institutions like community banks, either help big banks buy little banks or help the little bank sell for the best price they can. And that led up to a recession around 2007. Things got flipped upside down. And I thought, this tech space is sexy, looks interesting. You got all these kids blowing up, little Zuckerberg popping out of there. And I thought, hey, I'm struggling here and just trying to survive deal by deal. Why don't I get over there and, catch this big wave? And I got involved with the startup that it didn't work out well. It was a marketing technology platform that was betting against Google's algorithm, which was definitely not a good thing for a little startup to do. But
that's a tough one. Beating Google is not an easy task.
It was cool because I got exposure to how do you build a real product. And I was managing engineers, had no idea what I was doing. So oftentimes I'd lean on them to how am I supposed to be a product manager? What am I supposed to do? And I was really intrigued by the tools that software engineers were using to manage developing software. They'd always have these cool project management tools like Jira. Now we got a bunch of them. I took that as inspiration and built a product for mergers and acquisitions, essentially a project management tool for M&A, because our industry didn't have it. Every time I use these tools, I kept reflecting back and thought, why not for M&A? Because we use all these Excel sheets. And when you start off a deal, it's pretty simple. I need to see some financials. I'm going to create a model, get a sense of what this is worth. But as you continue, you go through this due diligence process where you want to validate this information, and you get more and more people involved, and they have their diligence requests. So there's a constant request of information, and then the other party, the selling party, would provide the information. And then you'll follow up with some clarification question, which is like, why is this way, not this way? Or tell me more about this employee lawsuit from last year. and then, next thing you know, you're literally trying to have this conversation on a massive Excel tracker that's full of requests for information and that the whole back and forth. You email this thing, and it gets pretty messy because the information is really sensitive that you're often requesting. So then they end up putting that information in a virtual data room, and then that virtual data room's like an environment similar to a Box or Dropbox, but it's got more security controls. You're going to have very granular permissions. You're going to have an audit trail in there, automated the watermarking of documents. So if somebody leaks a document out, you can tell, like, hey, William downloaded this at 3 a.m. on the 25th. Know exactly where it came from. So that was the first thing that we really focused on solving for, was how do we make the diligence process better in M&A. And then as we continue to work with corporations, the product evolved to managing integrations, then managing the pipeline. And today it sits as a full lifecycle management solution. There's one other piece to this story, and that's about 5 years ago, a friend of mine in marketing was like, hey, man, you should do a podcast. And at the time, I was like, what the hell is a podcast? And no idea. What was interesting at the time, what was going through my mind was our business is picking up steam. We're working with these corporate clients, but we're struggling because it's not that we can take one solution and just drop it in and scale it and keep doing that company to company. Every company had a distinctly different way of thinking about and approaching M&A. So we ended up using a podcast as a platform to enable practitioners in the industry to be able to share their lessons learned, and for us to document a series of these interviews and identify the patterns. What are proven techniques in the industry? And that's a big component of one of the areas we create value, is by publishing this open source framework we call Agile M&A. That's all we're doing, is just taking crowdsourced techniques and we keep compiling it in there. And that's evolved to become a full digital media business that we run, including a whole academy program. So now the business has become a hybrid of educational products that we in turn continue to evolve the technology around and offer those products as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, Kison, thanks for that background. And there's a number of tangents that we can go down. Can you just give me some quick context though? Since we talked about DealRoom, did you bootstrap the business? Did you raise capital? Like, how did you? Obviously, you ended up in that marketing startup, so you got some experience, some exposure. But how did you actually go from that experience to founding and building DealRoom?
I bootstrapped. I was fortunate. I came out of an industry where I had some savings and thought, hey, I'm going to put my own 250 grand and get this business started, and then burned through that relatively quickly. I thought, hey, I'm going to go out and get some investors. And when I got this term sheet back, because I'm based in Chicago, it's not a super angel investment friendly market here. I wasn't happy with the term sheet. I thought, wow, this is literally like selling limbs or children or something like that. And thought, I'm just going to double down. And I put more money into it. And I kept doing that. That was a scary thing, because I ran that business with about 7 years of negative tax returns before you hit a profitable year, and then you go in the right direction. So we're bootstrapped. Even to date, we're still operating without outside investors, which may change in the coming couple of years.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that context. And yeah, that's Definitely investing in the future and being able to finance gives you a lot of opportunities, right? In terms of how you run the business, not having to deal with investors that may or may not add value, right? If you can find the right investors, that's awesome. But if you end up with the wrong investors, you can end up in a lot of trouble. What are some of the things that you've learned throughout building the company?
It's a lot of things. I think one of the big early lessons was creating a feedback loop for continuous validation. I think as a first time founder, even multiple founder actually, sometimes you fail to recognize when you're taking actions on assumptions and that you may need to pump the brakes and take the time to validate those assumptions. So what happened was we had this right idea that we're going to build a project management product for M&A. And when you go through that process, you'll start by creating an outline. What are we going to build? Because we got to determine what functionality is going to go in the software. And then this term feature creep is such a real thing because you start with this idea and they're like, well, wait a minute, maybe we also need this. And then we probably need to have this and this. And we end up with this big outline that literally covered every tiny little step that you do throughout an M&A process. At the time, I thought, well, we should build this product in that chronological order by starting with the first thing. What do you got to do? You got to go out and find a deal. So now all of a sudden we're shifting our focus to build more of a marketplace type of product as opposed to a real project management tool. And we started doing that. We went out to market with this marketplace model. We had about, I think in 13 months, we acquired 1,300 users and had 200 deals posted on this platform, and looked at it and realized, I'm trying to even get to that point in time when I just looked at it and really, really realized that we just built one of the most sophisticated dumpsters for deals. That everything listed on there was just garbage. There's nothing that I would even remotely touch with my own capital. So how can I anticipate others would find this as an interesting thing? And that's when we really hit us hard. Went back. We were a really small team back then too. I remember going back to the drawing board. I had a couple summer interns and said, okay, let's revisit all of this for the blank slate. Let's figure out what problems we're actually trying to solve. Let's go to these people we've encountered, create cohorts of these potential customers. Let's really spend the time to go through and understand what is their biggest, let's prioritize it. Problem number one, they have 2, 3, and really build some weight around it or weighting system. And then look for patterns in the series of doing these interviews. Our goal was to do about 40 of these interviews. We really found out that it wasn't the thing that we're building was the real problem for these companies. It was the thing we originally wanted to do, which was managing the transaction. And we went and started focusing on that. And we kept this feedback loop going. This is a really powerful thing because now as we get the idea of what we want to build, we start creating mock-ups. Usually you hire some entry-level designer, maybe even student, and have them do some quick mocks. Some people do wireframes, but I just think they're a little technical and a normal person can't look at that. They're like, oh, where's the colors? This looks ugly. So you do some really basic mock-ups. But going back, it's so much cheaper to make those changes on a mock-up than to build the thing and then get that feedback. So we kept using this approach where we got feedback and iterated on it. And then as we did the same thing, as we built the prototype and we took it out, and we just ended up landing with a much better product that got us to market fit a lot sooner. I mean, there was some other changes we had to do because the next big challenge was the go-to-market. Yeah. And the thing at the time, which looking back, we should have, while we're doing the feedback loop for the solution and what we're taking out to market, we should have also been getting feedback about the go-to-market. You know, where are you going to learn about this product? You know, should we be knocking on your door? Should we be in certain places hanging out on certain publications? What does that look like? What are the channels we're going to use? And then the big time, we didn't even anticipate the trust factor. Because we're handling large, sensitive M&A transactions, we didn't realize how much effort it was actually going to take to really get trust with our customers. And that was brutally hard. I remember knocking door to door to door virtually with my knuckles really ready to bleed. And we finally got one investment bank that gave us an opportunity. Their client was doing an IPO on the Toronto Exchange. that got things going, gave us at least validation to get the next client and move forward from there. I think that feedback loop was the biggest lesson learned because that we still apply today. Everything we
That's awesome.
do, even new functionality, we use that same rigorous feedback approach.
That's awesome. And that makes sense, Kisan. And you were talking specifically to the people that would be using the software, I'm imagining, right? So the people that are actually in the process of managing the deal. Is that who you were actually speaking to get that validation?
So you would think of it as little cohorts because you might have different types of potential users and group them together. So that way you understand what characteristics they have. We really focused in the beginning on investment banks, thinking they're the ones that sell these companies. That's what we're solving for. When we went through that whole process of the hard way again, our go to market, we try to copy what the competitors were doing and go to market the same way they did, burning through a lot of money, not getting a lot of results. Then that's when we revisited and we actually realized they weren't the early adopters. The corporates were the early adopters. The banks, they have all these internal issues going on. The leadership isn't really incentivized to optimize the M&A process. They get paid basically commission on whatever the engagement value is. So once they get the engagement, they don't care about anything else. They pass it off to the junior bankers. The junior bankers are super miserable. All the stereotypes of working 100-hour work weeks and things like that. They just want to get another job. They want to get out of there. And then we found out the culture was so bad. It was so much of a pay to play. They'd take them out. They'd spend a bunch of money, take them out to steakhouses, clubs, and things like that. That's how they got business with them. And I'm like, that's not why we built this product. We want to be disruptive, innovative. We want to get So we ended up working with corporates, and it was totally different. It was so much focused on value. And if we can demonstrate we can create value, it became a nice long-term relationship. They were able to move our product from single transaction or per transaction model to a subscription model because now we're serving a different market. Now we have multi-year relationships with quite a few of these corporate clients we work with.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like the fact that you broke that down, right? There was the user feedback, but then also one of the things that you wish you would have iterated on is getting the go-to-market feedback as you were going as well, because that would have helped. And I can say that because we're struggling through that same experience right now. So I don't think it's something that's common, right? Unfortunately, I feel like that you need to make sure that you pair the two and really think through what's the go-to-market, not just you could build the best product in the world, but if you can't get in people's hands and the right people's hands, then you're dead in the water.
Let's pump the brakes, create that feedback loop, both when you're building the product and both when you're taking it out to market. It's even harder, so that's even more critical.
Absolutely. So you mentioned something called agile M&A. Can you talk to me about, you said you coined this term. It came out of the podcast, out of telling these stories of other people that are going through all the various different types of mergers and acquisitions. So I'd love to kind of talk about that, but maybe we actually take a step back and can we just define what mergers and acquisitions are? Right? People probably heard this term, and have an idea, but I think that might be a great place to start. And then I'd love to dive into the agile
It was
framework.
funny. I have 3 kids, so it's always each one of them. I try to explain what it means. I'm basically like, big company buys little company. That's what M&A is. There's 2 terms that fit in there: is mergers and acquisitions. When you're an industry insider, you have concluded that there is no such thing as merger. Mergers, the PR term to make things sound soft and funny. I remember going to take a flight once, and they had, I can't remember, it was British Airways and somebody else, and they were like, the 2 airlines had a whole wedding theme saying the 2 airlines are getting married and they're merging. And it's like, no, there's usually one management team that's taking over the other management team. That's what ends up happening. There's some great stories where we might see David acquire Goliath, and those are great epic stories. But at the end of the day, there's one dominant management team between the 2 parties, and it's an acquisition.
That makes sense. Yes, thanks for clarifying that. I think that's an important piece. So, okay, we've got our definition, essentially acquisition. Big company buys little company. What is this agile M&A? What exactly do you mean by that term?
This actually originated from our own engineering team in the early DealRoom days, where I was familiar with agile project management tools, but didn't realize there's a whole practice behind it. These software engineers have this agile approach. Some of the ideas and concepts actually originated from lean manufacturing, but manufacturing, it's an emphasis on efficiency, where software, it's, I'd say, more on speed. It's more about responding to changes as they're happening. And when I learned about these agile practices from the software engineering team, same thing. I kept drawing parallels to M&A and thought, why not for M&A? I started blogging about it, and I don't think anybody's still read those blog posts to date. But it got me enough thinking about it to the point where I started looking on LinkedIn and putting in keywords, M&A, agile, and I ended up having conversation with some M&A practitioners at Atlassian and Google. And they came back and said, yeah, we use agile here. It comes from our engineering culture, and we apply it to M&A with a lot of great success. That gave me enough validation to write a book. Christina Amiri at Atlassian's like, Kison, don't just write another book. Write a framework, create a framework so other companies can help them adopt these practices. And that's where Agile ended up becoming. It was a book we published based on case studies of Google and Atlassian that was a framework to help our other organizations adopt these same practices. Now I have partnered with another industry practitioner who also has an engineering background, knows Agile, been in M&A for almost 20 years. He's writing the second version, helping me write the second version. So it's kind of become this nice framework that we've created in-house, all geared towards managing M&A. It's not like an engineering agile M&A. It's very much dummied down. It's very simple. Honestly, I joke about it because if you look at what's happening with agile in the software space, all the scaled agile, it's just getting more and more complex for large enterprise. And we're doing the opposite. We're like, let's dummy this down so some high school kids could figure it out and apply some agile techniques. And you kind of need to in finance because sometimes you got folks that their attention spans tend to be a little short, and you got to make things as simple as you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
That's basically what we did. So if you think about that as a strategy, right? Let's back up because you're running a business too. There's a product you're selling, but can the product catch tailwind based off of a movement? When you look at the agile tools in the software space, the tools wasn't the big driver. Even I miss the old Atlassian marketing because they advocated for agile as a practice, and they always looked at waterfall was the bad guy. They're saying, look, like if you're still old school waterfall, you're missing out. This whole new culture and religion of agile is the better way. Let's show you how to live a better way. And that's where they put it. They put a lot of their team playbook out there. They give you all these like little plays. And hey, if your organization needs help standardizing these practices, we just so happen to sell a portfolio of agile product tools to help you standardize these processes or approaches. So that's where I was interested in that because that created a lot of tailwind in the software space. And you see other examples. HubSpot has their whole inbound marketing academy certification program. Again, same thing. They're purely advocating for an inbound model, saying, hey, you don't need to go knock on doors, like he said when he started DealRoom and just keep knocking on stuff. You can actually create a lot of good content that gets people interested in you. And then it becomes a lot easier conversation to have because they already know a lot about and they're generally interested. Hey, this is what all this, inbound marketing is. We just so happen to sell a marketing automation product that can make this really easy to do. So that was the initial state. What's funny about that is that's actually what ended up happening with our go-to-market. We shifted our go-to-market to focus more on the inbound content strategy. So for the past 4 years, I've worked with Marcia Lewis and our VP of marketing to build out this whole marketing function that our reps have it really well because they do see a lot of inbound leads that come in because of all this content that we put out. But that was the strategy of us coming out with publishing a book, putting a whole framework and all that effort was to do something bigger in the industry that if we can bring all these practices, provide it essentially for free. Here's this open source model. We want to allow industry practitioners to share their best learnings, identify stuff on our own, and make it easier for other companies to learn and adopt these practices. We're doing a good thing. We're creating a lot of value for folks. And can you knock us if we just so happen to sell one of the best tools to help apply these techniques? I don't know.
No, it makes sense. I like that. I like that approach. And it's interesting thinking about how you can focus on like the movement. And you really are focusing when you've taken the approach that you've done and looking at what Atlassian did, it was more focusing on like the outcomes of saying this process is so much better. You're going to end up having better outcomes. And we did then, as you said, to the point, we have just happen to have the tool that makes it so that you can drive these outcomes using this process that gives you what you ultimately want, which is better software products, or in this case, getting deals done quicker, better, faster, and less stressfully.
You got it. You got it.
So what are some of the, so you've switched to this content strategy. What has been that? Because I think that's a really interesting thing that I want to zone in on. You hear this all the time, like content is king and you should be producing more content, but like you have an actual strategy that's really focused on driving business outcomes. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you've developed this content strategy that leads more to inbounds?
Yeah, I'm thinking what our VP of marketing would say. Well, it's funny because she's a case study of her own because she came in as a individual contributor, and I try not to judge people until the results. When you get the results, then they kind of unwind it and figure out what went right, what went wrong. But she started off individual contributor. She would just, I think it was the first thing she did was social media. Like, let's make some social media accounts, post some stuff, and then it was a blog. Get the blog going. I'm just like, all right. And then I think it was soon after we paired up the podcast with the production that they were doing. So then the transcripts of the podcast fed right into creating blogs, creating ebooks. And next thing you know, we actually started ranking. And the SEO is a funny game. It doesn't come instantaneously. It's a good 6 to 9 months out, whatever you do, before you see the results. And it was really cool when we finally started seeing uptake. We used to get only one lead a month that would come in. And then you start seeing like 3 to 4 leads coming a month. Today, I just saw we get 3,500 contacts we acquired just last month alone.
Wow.
So, that's huge difference. And so I think that we recognize that. We realized at the time, because we weren't venture funded, that we're not going to spend a bunch of money on ads and run through that. And it tends to die out too. I've realized that from other folks I've talked to. I think that's the other thing that was helpful is being dumb, acknowledging it that I can go to industry subject matter experts, because I didn't know anything about marketing. And I reached out to a bunch of VPs of marketing and said, hey, look, I'm about to make my first marketing hire. I don't know what I'm doing. I just want to try to reduce the odds of making a bad mistake here. Would you mind giving me a half hour of your time? You'd be surprised. A lot of people are actually really, really willing to do that, even at large Fortune 500 companies. And then I still made a bad hire. I still did the bad CMO hire. I had to unwind that. But then I started working with Marcia, and it actually worked out really well. That focus on SEO allowed us to play the long game and really get ahead a lot of the competitors in some pretty meaningful ways when you start searching for different terms and you find us as a natural result. And I think you think about it different too, because the paid ads, you get a little bit more focused on the CTA and the conversions, which I feel like it's the opposite. Like, we got really good at providing quality content that hooks people in. Now, like later on, you got to get better at the conversions and that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I appreciate you sharing and being able to, reach out to other folks that have expertise in marketing and recognizing your own weaknesses when going through that and leaning on others. Because I think that is something that I found, especially in the startup world, is that people really are willing to give you time and be helpful and walk you through things if you have a very specific ask and aren't wasting their time. I think you can really learn a lot.
I was just thinking, William, the other big thing that helped us was we had a good mission. When we started the podcast, and I mentioned we were interviewing all these practitioners as a voice for them to share lessons, but that was the whole mission, was to enable practitioners to share lessons learned. And because we had that, it allowed the team to work together. They were really clear on what they needed to do, what they were trying to do, where the whole theme of the content was share lessons learned. So it was all about the practitioners that we'd interview or cite as subject matter experts, and it's their lessons. And we made them the heroes. I think that mission really helped solidify it, so we didn't veer off too much. And then the other part was repurposing content, having a good model for taking a long form interview, doing the blog post. Even we could do a full ebook off of one interview, and then you got the whole thing. Even the book I published was funny because I always joke, I'm like, there's probably 100 people in the world that's actually read this thing, but there's over 100,000 people that know about it, because the team, for a while, they would just take an excerpt out of the book and just publish it on LinkedIn. And they would start a whole conversation thread. Next thing you know, it was like 5,000 people viewed it. And they kept doing it over and over with like whatever the 150-page book. And so it's just really interesting how far you can take content if you have a good model to repurpose it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really key, and I appreciate you pointing that out because it's easy to do a long form interview or have some really great content, and then you don't maximize that, right? Take the little nuggets, the conversations, the learnings, and put that in a different format that someone else can consume and draw them in. So, really like that. Now, Kisan, I want to, you mentioned something at the very top that I kind of want to bring back. So, if I'm approaching M&A, if you're raising capital, one of the things that you almost always get asked from investors is what's your exit strategy? And there's a downside outcome, right, where you go to zero. There's you get acquired. That could be a good outcome. That could be a bad outcome, depending on what that acquisition looks like. Or you go public, and then maybe you end up on the other side of the equation where you are acquiring other companies. So like those are kind of the things that you can do, right? And maybe there's more that I'm missing, but framing this, I'm curious, like how should a company start to think about acquisition, whether as an exit strategy or even as a growth strategy, if they hit that stage where it might make sense to go bring in another company? And where would I start if that is something that is of interest? Like I don't know. Is it just go knock on the CEO's door or reach out on LinkedIn? Like what does that process look like? And I'd love to kind of go through just generally like what the steps are. And something that you mentioned earlier that really got you into the space was that you really enjoyed looking at financials and telling a story. And so I'm sure that's going to come into the context of it, but just a kind of overview of what the heck, where do I start from an acquisition perspective? And then why is this telling a financial story so important?
Well, let's look at both buy and sell side. I'll start with the buy side because that's my personal favorite side to work on. And when you think about the strategy, right, because companies want to go IPO and you have to be such a big market, and it's got to tell the investors a story of how we're going to be this iconic company on a public exchange because we're serving this market so big with a lot of room to grow. It's going to be exciting for retail investors. And it's not that easy. It's like there's only so much of that industries people don't even acknowledge. Like our industry, I know it's really, really borderline to go IPO. I mean, the virtual data room space is just over $1 billion market cap. The space we're really focused on is still emerging. So it's still growing in terms of the M&A project management side. It's tough to, build that case for us. But even if you are, there's a whole journey to get there. I did an interview with Henry Schuck, who runs a company called ZoomInfo. I liked his a lot because he had that, hey, I started with this company that I bootstrapped up to about 25 million revenue with a partner. And then they took outside capital. And I want to model it because I like that because that's the one common thing I've learned is if you raise all this money so early, you tend to lose control, but if you can hold it out and then you can start raising money, you get a lot of that best of both worlds where you get this capital accelerate, but you still can have better leverage on control. Versus if you bootstrap continuously, you'll get there. It just takes you longer. And he went through this and he got one of the big PE firms, I think it was TA Associates that invested in. And it was interesting because for them, they helped shape their strategy to really position them well to go IPO. That even where they were providing a business that was focused on a database of sales contacts, they allowed them to expand through this acquisitions of companies to increase that capability. Now, if you look at their narrative, they're a sales operating system. They got the whole go-to-market covered that you can do everything. You're going to get the contacts, the best of. You're going to have the systems to deploy the messages. You're going to have systems that can, track all the calls and things getting done. And then you got their Chorus AI that can track their performance and what are the things to optimize your sales. Now they're doing the same thing with their customer service and marketing and really, really have gone in such this large direction that would contrast quite differently if you talk to the guys 10 years ago and where they're at and where they're thinking. So I think that's where some of that can help is when you do work with outside investors and, if they are looking at helping you shape that strategy to go IPO, I think for that organization it did, because when you look at the way they're positioned with Zoom in from the public market, it's pretty clear. Like they're a company that holds a solid foothold as a public entity and still has a lot of room to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I used to use ZoomInfo at my first sales job. So very familiar, very familiar with their product.
Yeah, it's cool now because I remember looking at them a while back, and now you're seeing all the different products they have, their whole suite. The key thing with M&A that I think needs to be emphasized, because with his organization, that's a reason it was a big success. They acquired the right capabilities to build a stack that makes it a pretty compelling offering. It's to have a very defined and clear strategy that it's understandable across your organization. Like when they talk about adding the capabilities and they said, hey, here's this go to market motion, and we're going to keep buying capabilities along that go to market motion, it gets pretty easy. The people in this company, even if there's sales reps, I said it on a product demo, like they understand that. They're saying, hey, we've added this capability through this. And I like how he publicly speaks about it. I think that's a key thing because you don't have to be a public company to do acquisitions. You can do them as private, and you can actually raise money because if it ties to your strategy and you understand the value that's going to get created, you'll probably get some support. You'll probably be able to raise additional capital needed to be able to go out and execute that, especially if it's a deal you can put together working principal to principal. I'm working directly with the founder of the other company. We see this, we want to put this together. That way you have more leverage on the time frames to make things happen. You got more considerations to make sure, hey, this is really thought through and it's going to be a win-win for both of us. When you're doing some of the other M&A deals, to most often than not are driven through a bank auction process, those things all go out the window. It's a high competitive situation. That's where you see a lot of the big branded private equity firms just going in there with their design for speed and execution and their ability to take more risk because they're operating off of a structured fund. I got $1 billion fund. I got the bank ready to leverage it 10x. Yeah, I mean, take some bets like early stage companies, and you can execute that way. But when you're a larger entity, publicly traded, it's more difficult to do that. So there's a preference for them to work directly. And I think for you, even being like the little guy, doing your early acquisitions, the more you can have that bandwidth to have control in those early deals is really important. I would definitely try to do that, not take a fat check to the auction.
Yeah, that makes sense, Kisan. And I had a guest on, Will Moore, who was founder of Doorstep Delivery, which was one of the smaller regional players in the food delivery service before Uber Eats and Grubhub. And they started to see the writing on the wall when Uber Eats and Grubhub started raising, billions of dollars, and they were this small kind of profitable business. And they used an acquisition strategy and merger strategy. I think eventually they were the acquired one, but they acquired some companies, raised some capital so they could eventually exit those businesses because they realized there's just no way that they can lose. Because in the early days, Uber and Grubhub had all the money to spend and were fine, losing money to gain market share, which, the profitable companies couldn't do that hadn't raised and were bootstrapped.
Different dynamics. You got to change your
So
strategy.
exactly. So yeah, so talk to me a little bit about the sell side, right? So we kind of covered some of the buy side basics, thinking about it from what's your strategy, what are capabilities you might need as you're growing. But what about, all right, I'm looking for a partner, maybe I'm just done with the business, or investors are really breathing down my neck because I raised capital and they need to see a return, and maybe we just needed a right partner and need to get out. How does that typically work, or how would you think about it from the sell side?
I would do the same strategy first, right? Why am I selling? Because everybody always thinks of price. I'm going to sell and I want to get the highest price. But everything that happens after the deal, paperwork signed and everything, you get your check, that's your biggest regrets are always around that. If you come in and you see like all these people that really you're close with, if you're running a company, you're not close with anybody there, I don't know, I feel for you. But here you probably built some tight bonds. And if you just see the company get destroyed, people just get laid off left and right, get screwed over, they screw the product up, turn upside down, and basically burn the company in front of you. That's your biggest, worst case regrets from running a company. That doesn't feel good for any founder. This remains of the legacy that you left behind to reflect on your achievements. And it's all just shuttered with the no trespass sign, collecting dust, looking bad. Not the thing you want to leave behind. That's where that real regrets was that money can't even fix. And that's why that strategy is important, because if you value those things, you got to put some emphasis there. If it's really about making sure your people are taken care of, that they're in a good spot, the business can continue to grow and thrive, you should really build that in and make that your focus. If it's purely objectively the money and making shareholders happy, great. Hire an investment bank, run the auction process, and go to town. Like just let them do their thing and they'll get you a high price. They'll collect a good fee. Everybody's happy. You know, you got shareholders happy. They're happy. They're happy. You know, sometimes you get distressed environments and even the bankers can do some magic. They're good with lipstick. You know, they just know how to make things look pretty and marketable. But if it's a long game where I'm like not in a rush to sell this company, I don't have a mandate to sell it in the next 6 months. I can think about this. I'm thinking about it early, and I had a year, 2 years, even 3 years to plan this out. I would just start getting to know people in the industry. I would really be at the conferences, and even the big competitor I don't like we got dartboards with their logos on in the office and stuff like that. I don't care. I'm going to take it up to look past that. And I think I've learned from experience that even the most bitter rivals can actually be good business partners that you work with. I have one of our big competitors. I admire their CEO. I mean, he's awesome, and he's actually given me some great advice that's helped me professionally. So I wouldn't steer away from that. But I think when you do that, you don't have to put in this thing that you're selling. I think when you approach some of these other companies, and even looking at other beyond just direct competitors, but those adjacent that may want to get into the space, it's even having this early, hey, let's get to know each other. And then from there, maybe even look at partnering. What are little things that we could do together? Starting really small and building up. I think that's the big thing, because it goes back to the things that go wrong in M&A are always two companies with polar opposite cultures that just don't integrate well together. That just creates damage, trying to put these two pieces together that don't fit. People get headaches, they break, and they leave. And then you got more damage to fix. It's not a good thing. That's why a lot of value gets lost in M&A, and so nobody wants to do a bad M&A deal. When you can really plan it well, and you do have the people focus and how well they're going to come together and work together, and like the cultures really fit well, that's cool, because then you get a really low level of attrition. People stick around and they're motivated about the future. That's like a great win. Hey, maybe you got this thing where everybody's so hardcore startup, and next thing you know, they're getting acquired by Oracle, and it's just like, worst news ever. That's not cool at all. And then, but maybe it was maybe you got an engineering team that had big, ambitious goal plans, and they want to be number one. And then, Google's got the perfect platform, perfect plan. They join with them, and just the engineering cultures fit really well. And they're excited about it. They actually like having the Google logo. I know I'm kind of pinning some stereotypes on these two firms really bad, but
you're good. Yeah.
But
these are real examples, but
hey, we learned a lot about Google. We can say we learned a lot about Google's M&A approach. They're actually really good acquirers for the size and scale they operate on. Really good. But and then the team's motivated and excited. You can take so much more time when you have all the time in your world. Just like any decision, the more time you have, the more consideration you put in, the better decisions you'll make on what that's going to look like. And then usually in those large companies, and as I say, it may not be directly a large one, but large ones tend to be where a lot more synergies is. My product goes on a massive distribution platform and creates tons of revenue, or creates some unique capability with this other product. Usually it's those larger companies that have that level of scale that creates that massive amount of value. But there is a team in majority of these large corporations called corporate development. And they sometimes could be like a daunting firm because they handle all the inorganic activity, majority of which is mergers and acquisitions. But they're actually really friendly people. They're sharp folks that work in the department that are really cool because, one, they understand their business really well. Like for being a corp dev, you have to know how your whole company operates. So they're pretty cool with all the leadership across the whole organization. And then they're kind of there to, again, create value for their company. That's their job. They don't want to do bad deals. They want to do good deals. So their job is to look for companies, if like you're in their market space, and be able to have a relationship, understand where that opportunity could be, because it shifts. Or early life cycle might be too early. It's like there's too much of a risk. But you hit this right point, you got some validations, you got 100 customers, they're super happy. And now they look at it like, well, that product, we can build a plan in the next 5 years, get them to 100,000 customers. Like we're pretty confident we can do that. And that's when it gets really attractive to do this acquisition, because they see a lot of the synergy, right? It's either two forms, cost synergy or revenue synergy. Cost synergy means we don't need their accountant. We're going to lay them and get them off and put them on our accounting system and the HR folks, and we're going to cost synergy, save some money. We'll get rid of their, whatever, Amazon cloud and put them on Google Cloud and save some money. So that, that then revenue synergies is what are they going to do to actually generate the extra revenue? So then they're looking at it from that position of what are those things? Are we going to make it part of their Google Workplace portfolio? That's the key thing is when you think of who you're selling to, what are they thinking as a buyer? Like people think about valuation. There's no magic number. You hire the company. That's the value of the company. The value is unique to each individual buyer. Even within that, the different board members might have different interpretations about the value of the company. But so that you got to be in tune with that. How is the buyer understanding the value of your business? When you do understand that, then you can help guide that narrative. Now we can start building out the story of, hey, these are the things. You know what? Actually, with you guys taking this over, like I have all these contract, I have this external bookkeeper I spend a ton of money on. I have all these little things because now you understand that narrative that appeals to them because you get the sense of, hey, they're the hero in the story. The hero's got a challenge because they have all these other competitors coming in and they're enemy number one. So for them, they got to do some really good moves and buying a great technology that improves customer experience. That's what they're trying to do. And building into that narrative, right? That's what you guys are trying to do is build some new hot market, go make your millions of customers happy and excited. And when you understand that and can build into that narrative, that's where it's important to get that story part down, because I think that's still people align on that. There's a numbers component, people do focus on it, but there's got to be a bigger strategy that people can see where the value is going to get created.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I like the way that you said that specifically, that the value is going to be different for each individual buyer. So I just want to highlight that again, because I think that that's a really important thing to zone in on. Because, you could think of like the Instagram, Facebook acquisition, right? Like the value was going to, like, no one else could probably spend that kind of money and get the value out of Instagram as Facebook could, because of the synergies that they had from more distribution and expertise and all of that. Whereas, if
Yahoo,
I don't know,
imagine if Yahoo
Oracle
bought Instagram.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like exactly, right. So that's the point. So the value, I think, is very different. So that's a really interesting thing, and that's not a way that I had thought about it right before. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, it's the right way to think about it. It's unique.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of different areas when it comes to M&A, gotten in some of the basics, and then I appreciate you sharing your entrepreneurial journey. What would you say, we've touched on some of this mix, but is there anything that you would do differently from an entrepreneurial perspective, things that you would change if you were going to build DealRoom again today?
If I was going to build DealRoom again today, I struggle with a lot of leadership in this. So if I'd go back, I just want to be a better leader from the beginning.
Okay.
And if I were to say the key thing to make myself a better leader from the beginning would be listening, empathy, and being an empathetic listener, that if I early enough understood that I need to put my own ideas flying around in my head all the time, and even going to meetings where I have an objective of what I want to get out of it, put that all to the side, and really get into this mindset where whatever I know is wrong or I know nothing, be dumb, and listen intently to what the other person's thinking, how they're feeling, why they feel that way. What are their goals? What challenges do they have they're trying to overcome? And align myself to help them with those things. That just drives you so much further. And it's the basis of what you're trying to do as a business. You want to serve your customers. You have to be able to create value for them. It's the capability of you creating value for their customer that determines your success. So that's what you're essentially trying to do. But sometimes we kind of, like I said, you tend to get all these things you're trying to check off your list and do, but we get away from that. And I think if I really, really had that ability earlier to just listen first, I would have gotten there a lot faster.
I love that. Makes sense. Yeah. That's something also intangible, right? That is so hard to necessarily measure, but that it would have such a big impact, being able to really hone in on those leadership skills. What would you say, what does success look like, right? We kind of talked, you hinted at maybe following the Zoom info model. Now that you've more established, have revenue, you are in a position where if you did take on outside capital, you would be be able to use that for growth. But like that may or may not be what ultimately you define success as. But I'm curious, just from your this point in today, like how do you define success?
I think we set out with this goal to impact the industry. We want to make change. I think that success for us is when we see that change, this sort of before and after state that we know people are executing on M&A in this old fashioned way of using Excel and email to helping them bring them to this, hey, we have this single platform that runs a whole M&A process end to end, and seeing how much value they got, less tactical crap they're doing, a lot more focus on what actually generates value. People being happier instead of being confused, frustrated, big blow ups, that they're actually working together as a team. They're just motivated, productive. I think that impact we want to make, that there's good outcomes from having the success and scale, but it's us as a capability we've created, but being able to get that across to more firms. And then I think the people are happier at the end of the day. So you sort of get that as well. Your success is their success. So if you can make them more successful at what they do, and they sense that value, that even with the content and everything they interact, that you're a resource that's helping to create value. I think that's what we really want to identify. I don't know, William. That's a tough question. I don't know if I just break it down. It's like this obsession to be the best is what drives us every day. The fact that we everything that we put out in the market, every little product and sector we go after, it's defined by the problem we want to solve, and that we want to be the best in that segment. We have this burning desire to win, and we wake up with this discipline that's going to push us to do it relentlessly. That we're going to get comfortable doing all these uncomfortable things we have to do to get there because we made up our mind, the determination. When we have this heightened level of desire, we parallel it with this level of effort that usually, most often than not, gives us those results. So that's, I don't know, I think we just keep that. That's what I want. I just want to keep that mindset and approach. And we just accomplish all the things, even the new things that we want to do. The marketing team wants to have a golf tournament next year and a ski resort fly-in. It's like, great, let's do it. Let's be the best at it. Let's make sure our industry knows who we are, that whatever we touch or do, we're going to be absolute top notch. No exceptions.
I like that. I like that. Well, Kison, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down. How can folks first off, any last words that you want to share with the audience, and then how can folks connect with you outside of this conversation? I think you left us on a really high note there, but if there's anything else,
right, that's a glimpse of mergers and acquisitions. That's how exciting it is, right? There's the downs we talked about. There's some exciting thrills when you do these deals. So anybody that's interested in learning about M&A, we have a whole website, tons of free content. That's mascience.com. There's anybody that's even for, I think one of our social goals is encouraging M&A as a career path, because a lot of people don't think about it. We always think about stereotypes. You got to go be a banker and this and that, go to Ivy League school. Forget about that. We're taking all the best training from those same people at Google, ASEAN organizations, and we're providing it for completely free for anybody that's either coming from a diverse background, women, that just to be able to provide this diversity through a scholarship program that we have. So there's some cool stuff. And the idea is just to arm people with the training and tools so they can go out if they're interested in getting in a career in the field. But I think that's probably what we should have talked about, is getting a little bit more of that, even playing ground in the industry, democratizing the access to get M&A training and go out and be a practitioner in the industry. Because I think that's been a bit reserved to the little preppy Ivy League school kids that go to banking. And then sometimes it's the ones that actually have more of the diverse backgrounds, the ones that came from engineering, project management, that bring the real value to M&A. And I think creating that ability for those people in the industry to get into M&A, make an easier way to do that. That's one of the things that we're trying to do with the M&A Science. But anyways, everybody interested in learning more, it's mascience.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Bringing in more people, I think that's a great goal. And like I wouldn't know where to start when it comes to getting a job in M&A either. So I think that's awesome that you're providing that opportunity for folks and exposing it as a career path. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down, Kison, and thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this conversation.
I did too. I did too. We covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate you being so open about your journey and dealing with some of my not so great questions on M&A, but
No,
rambling questions.
no, I can tell you're a good communicator. Yeah, no, you got you got a little bright personality, so you're easy to talk to. I'm sure you kind of get a lot out of people.
I do my best. I do my best. Well, thank you again. So thanks so much for sitting down.
Hey, thanks, William.
On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying I'll never leave.